The Democratic and Republican parties are two of America's most important institutions. They're the first and third oldest political parties in the world. The Republican Party was founded in 1854. It founded because the unholy coalition between Northern Whigs and Southern Whigs collapsed because the Missouri Compromise, which limited slavery from the slave states from expanding west, unraveled. Something called the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed for the expansion of slavery westward into new territories. When this happened, a publisher of a New York paper, Horace Greeley, who would go on to be the founders of the new political party, the Republican Party, explained that it would birth a new political party, and it would be the greatest party, the greatest champion for freedom the world had ever seen. The Republican Party was the party that saved the Union. It was the party of the North and the West. It was the party of Lincoln. It was America's civil rights party. And three of its first four elected presidents were murdered: Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley. The Republican Party changed, though, in the 1960s. When Lyndon Johnson signed the civil rights legislation in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965, it fractured the Democratic Party. And over a 20-year period, the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, became the party of the South, and it took on the trappings of the South. The United States of America is a country that likes to say that it had never been defeated in a war, at least on the battlefield. But that's not true for a significant portion of the country, the former Confederate States of America. They did lose a war. They were defeated in a war. They were occupied, and their way of life was wiped out. And that wiping out of that way of life spurned a myth. And the myth is something called the lost cause. The idea that there was nobility in the Confederacy, that there was nobility in the slave state. And in fact, that slavery wasn't the purpose of the war at all, though of course it was. This lost cause myth was designed to imbue the Confederacy with morality, to give it meaning and honor, and to make its leaders, who were traitors like Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, heroes. The lost cause is a powerful myth in America, and one that has not faded gently. But when you peel away the lost cause, what is there is deep racial animus, decades of racial terror that yielded to Jim Crow. And so when the Republican Party became the party of the American South, it picked up the grievances of the American South. It picked up the resentments of the American South. It picked up the baggage of all of those who were defeated in their stand to maintain racial supremacy, where white people were above the law and black and brown people and any other minority, or really anyone who was different, was below it. And over 20 years' time, as the Republican Party became the party of the South, the Democratic Party became fully an American party, a pluralistic party, consisting of all of the different types of Americans that there are, the descendants of every race, of every creed, of every religion, of every stripe, of every faith, of every belief. The Democratic Party became the home to pluralism and thus to freedom, while the Republican Party became the home to simmering resentments and grievances that played out in long simmering tensions between the talk radio and the entertainment wings of the party, who catered to an extremist base, and the political leaders, men like John McCain and Bob Dole, and Mitt Romney and George Bush, who tried to contain it and certainly were able to defeat it when they were challenged in primaries. But all of that changed in 2009. When John McCain lost the presidency, Republicans also lost power in the House and in the US Senate. Barack Obama's Washington held no power for them. There's a famous story about Mitch McConnell meeting with a group of Republican leaders on the evening of President Obama's inauguration, where these Republican leaders pledged to each other that they'll do anything to make President Obama fail. They did everything they could to make him fail. But they weren't the leaders of the Republican Party anymore. The gravitational leadership had moved, it had shifted. The leader of the party was Roger Ailes. In fact, Fox News consumed the party. The entertainment complex grew more and more powerful. And the simple truth is this: the overwhelming majority of Republican members of the House and the Senate, they pushed their mothers in front of a train before they would have upset Roger Ailes. He was the king. He was the king of the hill until Donald Trump came along. John Kennedy's admonition about the foolishness of men who seek power by trying to ride the back of the tiger had been proved once again. Roger Ailes had wound up inside the tiger. The king is dead. Long live the king. The new king of the Republican Party was Donald Trump. And what Donald Trump brought into the party was what men like William F. Buckley had tried to expel from it. He brought back in the anti-Semites. He brought back in the extremists, the militias. He brought back in a rabble of conservative crazies, from Matt Schlapp at CPAC to Marjorie Taylor Greene, to a generation that has no understanding of the ideas and ideals of the country, that is stewed in a resentment incited by a television network that just this week admitted that every word that its hosts say in the primetime hours is all premeditated lies, aimed at keeping an incited audience incited, lest they go somewhere else for their incitements. So this Republican Party, which is fused with the television network, has become commoditized. It has been stripped of any belief, any principle. There is no ideology except for the organized conspiracy that believes it deserves power at any cost, at any price. And the fundamental betrayal of this party towards America came on January 6th of 2021, where hundreds of members of Congress threw out the votes, through their vote, of millions of Americans, overwhelmingly people of color from the inner cities of America, who decided the outcome of the election in their states. Donald Trump railed without evidence, without proof, that it was a stolen election, which would have made the legitimately elected president of the United States, Joe Biden, illegitimate. What happened next was a series of incitements that triggered a murderous insurrection that sought to topple democracy in the United States by throwing out the results of an election. And you know what? It almost succeeded. There's a thought about coups that if they're not properly punished, what they become is an audition for the next one, a warm-up act. What happened on January 6, 2021 was a Republican coup incited by Republican members of the US Senate, Republican members of the US House, Republican activists, a Republican wife of a Supreme Court justice, and the paid liars of Fox News, who really are the Republican Party. A party born to fight for freedom, a party born of the noblest instincts that produced the greatest leader in the nation's history, Abraham Lincoln, has succumbed to the basest and worst impulses of man. And in doing so, it has surrendered its decency, and it has surrendered its moral authority for leadership in the United States. And this poses a national crisis because America is a two-party system. A plane can fly with one engine, but it can't fly with one wing. The Republican Party deserves defeat because the Republican Party is unfit. And unless and until a Republican comes along that is able to seek the truth and to persuade the millions that have been poisoned by Rupert Murdoch's propaganda and Donald Trump's insanity, then the Republican Party remains a vessel of extremism. Because the Republican Party at the core must be judged by the least of its parts. And the least of its parts are now fully at the table, no longer hidden from view. And it's a scary bunch.